I used to work as a bartender here in Toronto, at a couple of different spots too, but my favorite was the wine bar that was within walking distance of my apartment. It was a 30 to 40 minute walk, so I used that term walking distance pretty loosely, but my route was from Queen Street West to High Park North, some of the safer areas of the city, so before the night in question at least, I'd never run into any trouble on the way home. I was a woman of just 23 at the time, and I was acutely aware that I was putting myself at risk by walking alone at night. I was a woman of just 23 at the time, and I was acutely aware that I was putting myself at risk by walking alone at night. But after the first few journeys, once I saw how quiet and deserted my route was, I started doing it every night. I got so comfortable that I even started listening to music during my walks, but only in one headphone and only on low volume so I could hear things going on around me. But no matter how vigilant I was, no matter how quiet my route, I guess it was only a matter of time before my luck ran out. And when it did, it ran out big time. It had been a quiet Wednesday evening at the wine bar when we closed around 11:30, and then after a quick clean down, my coworkers and I were clocked out and headed home by around 11:45. We said our goodbyes, and then I headed off on my usual route, which at first took me through a bunch of quiet back streets before I turned onto a long, tree-lined avenue. High Park was on the left of me, buildings were to the right, with hardly any traffic at all driving up and down the roads. As I was walking, a rare vehicle passed me before turning onto the street ahead of me. I noticed in passing that it was a white van and paid just enough attention to recognize when it drove around a second time, taking the exact same turn. I thought, this van's just driving around in circles, so I wasn't surprised when I saw it coming around the block again. But instead of passing me, it slowed to a crawl at the curb, and I heard the driver calling out to me. I took out my one earphone and I saw this tubby-looking guy with sandy brown hair sitting in the driver's seat, and then when we made eye contact, he asked if I was from around here. I didn't walk over to his window right away, I just told him sure, and then he responds, "Oh, thank God. Last couple were all tourists." Before he asked if I knew where this particular street was. I did know where it was, and I actually understood why he had trouble finding it too, because it was one of those awkward side streets with crappy signage that's tough to find unless you know it's there. And I started trying to explain where it was, but I quickly realized that I was explaining things poorly, so when he held up a map and asked if I minded showing him because he'd only forget what I told him, I didn't think twice. I guess this is the part where I explained something about the driver, something that had me lowering my guard in a way that I wouldn't have otherwise. If this had been some creepy-looking a-hole, staring at me from his driver's seat, sort of saying, "Hey girl, you got a man," then there's no way in hell that I'd walk over like I did. But this guy with the sandy brown hair and blue polo seemed a little, I don't know how to put this other than slow. He had this kind of childlike innocence about him, like he was too dumb to be bad, and when he mentioned something about helping his mom move into a new apartment, I guess I got this harmless vibe from him. But that was the point, because if I was the fish, then he was the lure, and I fell for it hook, line, and sinker, as they say. I walked over to his window and he held the map out for me to point at it, but then no sooner had I touched the paper, the van's center door slid open on my left, and a man came leaping out the back. The sudden noise of the door sliding open scared the hell out of me, so I jumped back on instinct before the guy's feet even touched the concrete. And then once it hit me what was really going on, when I realized how dumb I'd been to fall for what was obviously a trap, I started running as fast as I could. I tried to get away, but the guy chasing me caught up fast, so the best I could do was run for some railings that belonged to one of the buildings. And all I could think was, they can't get me in the van if they can't get me off those railings. So I held on to them for dear life and started screaming for help. As the guy wrapped his arms around my waist and started trying to drag me back towards the van, all I could do was scream, while holding on harder than I'd ever held on to anything before. The guy pulled so hard I thought my arms might break, but I knew that was better than whatever was waiting for me in that van. He tried pulling my hands free by the wrist, but I managed to bite him on the hand, like the real bony part on the back, so he screamed and let go. But he was so mad that he started trying to punch me, directly in the face too. I guess to try and knock me out so I'd let go. He pulled his fist back and swung at me, but I saw it coming and started shrinking down, so he couldn't do anything but punch my neck and the back of my head. He then started trying to kick my wrist so I'd let go of the railings, but every time he got close, I'd regain my grip as he lunged down to grab me. I was screaming the whole time, but after he failed to kick my hands free of their grip, he joined in with the yelling too and told his buddy in the driver's seat to come give him a hand. Now, I'd thought I'd done a pretty good job of holding that one guy off and stopping him from dragging me away, but I knew that the two of them trying together would be the end of it. So when I looked around and saw the bigger, tubbier guy opening up his door, I started wailing as well as screaming. I wasn't just screaming for help anymore. I was begging them not to take me, saying that I'd do anything if they just left me alone. But neither man was interested. They'd made it up in their minds about what they wanted to do with me, and there was no reasoning with them. But then, just as the bigger guy started walking towards us from the van, I heard someone yelling from all the way across the street, shouting for them to get their hands off of me right now. Someone was running towards us, wearing nothing but a robe, their underwear, and a pair of sneakers. But the thing that really caught my attention was the big old hockey stick they were carrying. The tubby guy ran back to his driver's seat the second he saw the guy with the stick, and then the scumbag trying to drag me off the railings did the same when he realized that they were suddenly in for a fair fight. He ran, jumped into the back, then as soon as he slid the door closed, the van took off, and the man running towards us had to dart out of the way so it didn't hit him. He took a swing at it with his hockey stick as it sped off, and then turned back to me, running over asking if I was hurt and needed any help. He turned out to be the owner of a store across the street, one who lived in the apartment above. He'd been up late and had heard me screaming from the moment I started. He actually apologized for taking so long because he had to put on some clothes and grab his hockey stick. But I didn't mind because he was literally my hero in that moment. He invited me into his store so I could wait for the cops there and get something warm to drink. I accepted the invite, and within maybe 30 minutes, I was talking to a pair of Toronto PD officers with a mug of hot cocoa in my hands. I told them everything, not that they were of any help, and so did the store owner. And then once I was done, they were nice enough to give me a ride home so I wouldn't have to head back out into the dark after going through something so terrifying. I guess it was the least they could do, but it still meant a lot to me, as did the help that I got from Mr. Hockey Stick in his little furniture store, a piece of which now sits in my apartment as a kind of thanks-turned-memento. Not a memento of how I almost got abducted, but a memento of that perfect moment of compassion and kindness that led him to come running to my rescue in his underwear while carrying nothing but a hockey stick. Back when I was still freshly graduated and working my first real job in the city, some coworkers invited me to go for drinks with them on a Friday night. I had an amazing time, and it was awesome to get to know them in such a casual and different environment. And then, at around 1 a.m, I decided to call it quits and take a cab home. I walked out of that club, and then I was on my way towards one of the larger streets where I was more likely to see a vacant cab when I realized that I'd lost my purse somehow. I knew the chances of getting it back that night were slim to none, and the best thing to do was just cancel the card and write off any cash in there as a loss. But then after calling around to some friends and family to see who was free to give me a ride home, I found out everyone with a car was either drunk, asleep, or both. I realized that if I was going to get home that night, I either had to hitch a ride with a total stranger or walk a heck of a long way on my own and in the dark. And since the idea of the first thing scared the ever-living hell out of me, I chose the second thing and started walking. I cannot overstate how glad I was that I chose to wear sneakers that night. I made steady progress away from the busier, more party-oriented areas of downtown and toward the more chill and less populated ones. It was actually kind of cool walking through all those abandoned places. They were usually just teeming with life in the daytime, and now they were very peaceful and empty. But it was also kind of eerie too, and I kept having to push the image out of my head of some creep jumping out at me from the shadows. I was careful where I walked, kept looking around to make sure that no one was following, and tried sticking to well-lit areas too. And then when I finally did see another person, I kind of panicked a little, thinking, oh God, please let them be cool. But my mini panic stopped right as I looked closer and saw it wasn't some creeper in a hoodie intent on stalking me all the way home. It was another girl, similarly aged and similarly dressed too. She was walking on the other side of the street as I turned a corner, and we were both walking in the same direction too. So when I looked over and we made eye contact, she asked if I wanted to walk together with her. And she acted super extroverted and friendly, and I knew two girls walking together was way safer than just one walking alone, so I figured, what the heck, why not? And she crossed the street to introduce herself. She told me her name was Kim, and that she may or may not have accidentally given her cab fare to a bartender who must have assumed it was just a tip. We joked about how she'd accidentally earned herself some good karma and that she'd probably get that $20 back somehow in the near future. And then the conversation continued as we carried on our way. And I think like maybe a third of the way through the journey, we saw a guy staggering out from a side street and start walking in the same direction. He was the opposite side of the street, so we had a nice safe distance between us. It also took him a minute to realize that we were there, and when he did, he started yelling stuff like,
"What's up, ladies? Need a little company over there?"
I did my best to ignore him, and so did Kim. But then under her breath, she said, "No, thank you," in a way that had us both stifling these giggles. Now, the guy asked what the heck we were laughing about, and at first he sounded pretty chill, but then he changes to,
"Wait, you two are laughing at me, aren't you?"
And he started to sound very offended. And over the next few minutes, we listened to him yelling stuff like,
"Oh, I get it. You think you're better than me, is that it?"
And while at first he sounded kinda hurt in a jerk-off kind of way, he got angrier and angrier as we just kept on walking. Now in the end, Kim suddenly explained how her place wasn't far and I was welcome to come inside for a drink and a bathroom stop before I walked the rest of the way home. I actually really needed to pee at the time, so I would have accepted anyway, but having that drunk a-hole now basically following us absolutely sealed the deal. I accepted her invite, and then we darted down the next side street so we could lose our not-so-charming traveling companion. And when we heard him yelling, we picked up our pace a little, laughing at how outraged he sounded. I asked Kim if she thought he'd follow us, and she responds, "Probably, but watch this," before she turned us down another smaller street. We were completely out of sight, leaving the drunk guy yelling aimlessly in the street, and we only had to walk a few more minutes before Kim then says, "We've arrived." It took me by surprise, because we were walking past these super nice houses with gates and courtyards out front. I lived in a crummy apartment, but here was Kim, not too much older than me, and she had this really nice house. I was so taken aback that I kind of froze on the spot and told her that her place was amazing. Kim smiled like that was something she heard a lot. I couldn't help the barrage of questions that came next, but Kim was gracious enough to answer them for me. She said she lived alone and with a pretty hefty discount on the rent because she rented from a family friend. And I'm like, damn, I'm jealous. But in a sort of I'm happy for you kind of way, and Kim just sort of smiled before inviting me inside. The gate wasn't locked, so she just pushed the latch and opened it, and then we stepped into this cute terracotta courtyard with shrubberies on either side of a path. And there was a security light that turned itself on as we got closer to the door. But just before it did, effectively blinding me if I tried looking up, I swore that I saw a curtain twitch on the second floor of the house. Now, as we reached the door, I asked Kim if anyone was staying with her, and when she said no, I reached for her arm and stopped her unlocking it. She asked what I was doing. I told her about the twitching curtain and how it made me think that we'd been watched from the second floor. She told me it was probably just the alcohol messing with my eyes and that no one was inside. So I backed up a little ways from the porch and looked up at the windows again. The security light had turned off because nothing was moving on the path, which meant that I wasn't blinded by it when I tried looking up. And when I did, I saw the curtains twitch in a second-floor window again, clear as day, like I'd caught them looking. Now I'm like, for real though, is there someone in your house, Kim? We need to call the cops. But she snapped back saying I needed to chill, just come inside, relax, have a drink. And she said a bunch of other stuff, but I didn't hear it. All I could hear were the alarm bells blaring in my head on account of the way Kim was acting. I might have been a little drunk, but I'm not stupid, and I slowly began to suspect the unthinkable. Kim wasn't just drunk and overconfident. She knew someone was in that house, and since all that seemed to matter to her was getting me inside, I realized things weren't as they seemed. At first, all I wanted was to call the cops, because better safe than sorry, right? But then once I realized Kim maybe wasn't who she said she was, I just wanted to get the hell out of there. I didn't even say bye or anything. I just turned around and walked back towards the gate. Then the last thing Kim said in character was kind of offended, saying, "You're not leaving, are you?" And then no more than a few steps later, I heard the sound of feet rushing up the path behind me before Kim suddenly grabbed me by the hair. I asked what the hell she was doing, but she was done talking to me, and she was done listening to me too. She didn't try to hit me or anything, she just tried to hold me steady, and then my eardrums felt like they were about to burst when she screamed right up close to me, "Get down here and help me!" I think hearing that sent me into overdrive, and I managed to push her to the ground before pulling my hair out of her grip. I felt that horrible burn as some was torn out from my scalp, and I didn't care though, because I was free to run towards that front gate again. But right as I did, I saw someone standing in the open doorway of the house. Someone huge, and they were there to chase me down. I ran harder and faster than I ever did during high school track, which, without blowing my own trumpet too hard, was pretty damn fast. And I only looked back once I ran through the streets, and the man chasing me was so close that I was going to burst into tears while running at full speed. So all I did was run and run as fast as I could till I saw a highway that had a few cars going back and forth. I ran out into that road and right into the path of an oncoming car, which obviously had to brake once it saw me. The driver was obviously pissed, but when I tried to show him what I was running from, there was no sign of the man who had been chasing me. I remember him stepping out of his car door a little to tell me to get the hell out of the way, and so I did. I staggered back to the sidewalk on shaky legs and then called the cops. Most of the walk back to my apartment was spent on the phone with the cops as I explained how I just escaped a potential kidnapping, or maybe worse. The dispatcher said that she'd have an officer visiting the house that I described, and then she gave me a case number so I could call back and ask about what they'd found. But I didn't need to, because the very next day I had a detective from the state police call me who asked if he could pay me a visit. He seemed super interested in Kim and seemed disappointed that I hadn't gotten a good look at whoever had been inside the house, which, by the way, turned out to be unfurnished and owned by a realtor who had no idea two individuals had broken in. They were gone by the time the cops showed up, and the only trace of them was a strip of masking tape attached to a wall that the forensics people said was clean. The detective said that while I've gotten very, very lucky, it was my smarts that had saved my ass in terms of figuring out it was a trap. But to me, it wasn't any of that. I got away that night because those sick freaks were too impatient, and Kim was too crappy of an actress to silence those alarm bells in my head. They might have been smart enough to get away with trying whatever they had in mind, but I swear, make them just a little bit smarter, and I'm not sure that I'd be around to be writing this right now. In 1981, a seemingly ordinary group of men in Chicago concealed a darkness that would shock the city. Bound by twisted beliefs and unrelenting cruelty, their actions left behind a trail of fear, grief, and unanswered questions that still linger today. Check out the full story on my true crime channel, Saturn Soul. link down below. In November of 2010, me and a few pals of mine went out on a lads' night to celebrate our mate Jacko's 25th. We went to a steakhouse before a massive pub crawl, and then ended up in a club till about midnight when I decided to catch the last bus home. I wished the birthday boy a safe trip home, said my goodbyes to everyone else with hugs all around, and then I walked out of the club and started towards the bus station. When I checked the time on the way, I noticed that I was cutting it a bit fine, but I still thought I was going to make it. But then I remember turning a corner and seeing my bus at its stand in the distance, taking on the last passengers in the queue to board. I ran like the clappers trying to catch it, shouting for them to wait. But either the driver thought that I was just some mad pisshead on a tear, or he ignored me so he could stay on schedule. Because before I could even get close, the bus pulled away from the stand and drove off without me. I was absolutely gutted. Not just that I'd missed out, but I'd spent so much money on scoff and ale that I couldn't afford a taxi. If the same thing happened today, I'd be able to move some money between accounts using my banking app, or get my girlfriend to send me some and then pay using the contactless on my phone, but back then, that wasn't an option. I also didn't want to dick a driver around by being all, "Look, mate, I might have some cash at home. Will you give me a lift on the off chance I've got enough?" And so, I bit the bullet and decided to just hoof it. After hitting the road, I called my girlfriend and told her what happened. And then after she laughed and said it sounded like I'd had a good time, I asked if she had any cash on her to pay for a cab. She didn't, but when she offered to get dressed and walk to the nearest cash point, I told her not to trouble herself. She asked how long the walk would take me, and when I said about an hour and a half, she said that she'd have some food and a nice hot bath ready for me by the time I got in. I thanked her, told her I loved her, and then said I'd see her soon. Now, the first part of the walk wasn't that bad, actually. I was still quite drunk and in a really good mood after seeing all the lads, so my spirits were high as I got further away from the city center. About 40 minutes in, and still with quite a way to go, I was walking on a straight stretch of road near the women's hospital. I was whistling Don't Stop Believing myself because it had been played at almost every place we went to, when I suddenly felt my phone vibrating in my pocket. I thought it'd be my girlfriend asking, "You okay?" or "How far to go?" And while it was indeed her sending me a text, all it said was help. I hit the call button, hoping she'd hit send too early on a help me take the bins out type of text, but I only heard one ring before she forwarded the call to voicemail. When I brought my phone down from my ear, I saw that she was typing something, and when the messages came through, I started shaking like a pooing dog, because all they said was, "Someone's in the house. I'm under the bed." I told her to call 999. She texted back seconds later saying that she couldn't because the person inside would hear her. I texted her saying, "I'll call then," and then dialed 999 as fast as I could. I couldn't run because I needed to talk to the 999 lady, but I also couldn't just walk because everything in my head was screaming at me to run. And so I'm talking to this lady and I'm going back and forth between speed walking and jogging while panting down the phone about how my girlfriend needs help. It came out in a big word vomit as well because obviously the most important thing was telling that lady the address so she could get the police there as fast as possible. And I feel terrible saying this now, but the way that she was talking back to me was so calm that it made me really angry. I remember there was a point where I was shouting, "Please, I'm begging you, someone's in the house with her." But in reply, all she asked me was, "Can you tell me what this person looks like?" In just the most nonchalant voice you can imagine. I lost my temper a bit and shouted, "Course I bloody don't. Because I'm not effing there, am I? Just get someone out here, please. I'm literally begging you." But all she said to that in the same deadpan voice was something like, "I understand you're upset, but I've got to ask these questions for officers, okay? They're on their way to your address as we speak." And when I asked how long they'd be, she wouldn't give me an exact time. She just said no more than a couple of minutes because they had a unit in the area. I asked her to promise me that they were going as fast as they could, and then when she did, I thanked her, said I had to go, and then hung up. I stopped to fire off one last text, asking my girlfriend if she was okay, and then started legging it down the road. I kept my phone in my hand, hoping it'd quickly vibrate with her reply, and then the longer it stayed quiet, the more scared I got. I played a lot of football back then, so I was pretty fit, but all that beer and sambuca in my stomach, I tried fighting it because I couldn't afford to stop, so when it came, the first round of vomit streamed down the front of my nice white shirt. I spat the rest out and kept on running, but once I'd started, I couldn't stop, and a sudden stomach spasm had me slowing to stop before I lurched over and puked again. I knew I had to get it all out, so I made sure to heave until my stomach felt empty, and once it did, I picked myself up and got ready to run again. But then I suddenly saw a light shining out to me in the distance. And at the time, it felt like it was light shining down from heaven. It was the light on top of a hackney cab, saying it was vacant and on for a job, and when I saw it, an idea struck me. I could flag it down, explain the situation, and then swear on my mother's life that I'd get him the fare that I owe him if he just got me home to my girlfriend. At the time, I couldn't imagine anyone kicking me out of their cab after hearing that, so as the light got closer, I started jumping up and down and waving my arms till I saw his turn signal start flashing. The driver pulls his cab over, and I noticed that he had his passenger window open, so I'm thinking, explain to him there, then jump into the back when I get the go-ahead. But I'll never forget the look on his face when he saw me up close. He looked well and truly disgusted, and then I remembered how I was absolutely drenched in my own sick. And he thought that I was just some lone pisshead having puked all over myself, and while I suppose that was technically the truth, it obviously wasn't the whole story. Now I'm screaming, no, wait. And as he drove off, and then he sped off into the distance, all I wanted to do was scream at the top of my lungs. I didn't. It was a waste of time and energy, and since I've wasted enough puking up my guts and trying to flag down a cab, I got running again, as fast as I could, and I didn't stop until I could see flashing blue police lights outside my house. It was a relief to know that they were actually on their way like the 999 operator said, but I still don't know if my girlfriend was actually okay or not. And since she hadn't replied to the "you okay" text that I sent before I started running, I had this terrible feeling that she wasn't. I ran up to my door and unlocked it, then as soon as it was open, I started calling out my girlfriend's name at the top of my lungs as I ran for the stairs. But I hadn't even touched the bottom step before a policeman appeared from the living room and said, "It's all right, mate. She's in here. Everything's fine." He said, "Everything's fine," but he meant nobody's hurt, because my girlfriend was anything but fine when I saw her. The police had only been there a few minutes, so she was still in these floods of tears from all the fear, but also the relief of those two policemen having arrived when they did. She ran up and tried to give me this big hug when I walked into our living room, but then we had this really quite surreal moment of her stopping dead when she saw the state of me. She had tears in her eyes, snot coming out of her nose, and she pointed at my shirt and asked, "Is that puke?" I explained I vomited on myself when I'd been running home to help her, and then got her crying again. She later said it was because she realized how helpless I must have felt, and she was exactly right. I've never felt so powerless in my entire life. After changing my shirt and giving myself a little baby wipe bath, I went back downstairs and made a cup of tea for me and my girlfriend. She hadn't fully explained to the police how everything had happened yet, because the first thing they did when they got there was search the house to make sure it was safe, and that meant that I got to be there when she told them the full story. Not long after I called her to tell her that I was going to be late, my girlfriend was in the kitchen making us a bit of food when she suddenly heard a noise coming from the window in her back pantry. It was only quite a soft sound, so she thought that it might have been one of the stray cats she loved to feed, having smelled bacon on the grill. But when she walked into the back, she saw that it wasn't a cat climbing through the window. It was a man, and he was squeezing himself through. She said he was already head and shoulders through when she found him, and while he was wearing a ski mask type thing so she could only see his eyes, she said they practically lit up when he saw her. She thought that he might slither back out and run off once she caught him, but seeing her only seemed to make him even more determined to squeeze his way through, and that's when she ran upstairs to hide under the bed. She said that she could hear him from her hiding place, going from room to room, but he wasn't searching for phones or laptops or game consoles. He wasn't interested in any of that. He was interested in her. She told the police about texting me and how she'd remembered something about how deaf people can use a 999 text service. She tried that, but didn't know that you had to register before you could use it, so none of her texts got a reply. Then, by the time I texted her asking if she was okay, the man who broke in was so close she was scared he'd hear her thumbs tapping her phone screen if she tried replying, so she stopped altogether. She said that she was so scared she barely even breathed when he walked into our bedroom. She just laid there on her front, hand over her mouth, watching his black trainers stepping around our carpet very softly, like he was trying to creep up on wherever she was hiding. She said that gave her hope at first, how she saw that as a sign he didn't know where she was yet. But after walking around the room a bit, the man stopped dead and stayed still, facing the bed. My girlfriend said that she thought that was it, that he was about to reach under the bed, drag her out kicking and screaming, and then do God knows what to her. But instead, the man started laughing, softly at first, but then it grew into this almost childish giggle. She kept waiting for him to pounce and started planning how she was going to bite him and scratch him, anything to keep him off her. But instead of lunging for her, he walks towards her dresser and then towards the mirror. He stayed at the mirror for a second, and my girlfriend thought that he was sort of looking at himself or something. But when they both heard the police sirens, he bolted out of our bedroom, ran down the stairs, and escaped out the back door, which is how the police got inside to look for my girlfriend. It was only when she was sure that it was police and not a trick by the man looking for her that she came out of hiding and made herself known. But when she saw something written on our bedroom mirror, she said that she burst into tears. He'd used one of her lipsticks to write 3 little words: I found you. Like it was some sick game that he was playing for kicks. She said she couldn't give them much of a description because all she'd seen properly were his eyes and his trainers, and even then, she couldn't be sure what color his eyes were, only that his trainers had been black Nikes with a dark red swoosh. The police said that it could actually be really helpful, and she might be surprised how often people get caught because of what shoes they're wearing. That gave us hope that the person might be found and arrested, but after weeks and weeks of hearing nothing about it back, we called the number that we'd been given to be told that there had been no progress whatsoever. I wasn't surprised because, despite being outwardly very hopeful for my girlfriend's sake, I didn't expect much from the police. I'm not saying that they don't work hard at their jobs, but without fingerprints or DNA and without any real description to go on, there wasn't much that they could do except advise us to keep our windows all closed and locked at night. But that's just the thing. My girlfriend hadn't just left the back window open. It was November, so it was bloody freezing out. She literally only opened it minutes before she put the bacon on, so the smell of it wouldn't build up in the kitchen, and that's what makes us think that either A, she was extremely unlucky and opened the window just in time for some creeper to pick his moment to peek over our back wall, or B, whoever tried climbing through that window had been watching her as he opened the window and realized she'd gifted him a way in. Both options made me feel sick to think about and meant that we didn't mind shelling for some extra locks on the front and back doors. We're also mega vigilant about open windows now, even in the daytime during the summer, and my girlfriend, now my wife, never ever keeps them open at night when she's alone, not even during summer heat waves. It can get to be a pain in the butt sometimes, but don't get me wrong. But it's worth it to know that same horrible scenario won't play itself out again, because I'm not sure my nerves could stand another go. So I have a scar, a really obvious one too, running almost horizontal in line with my cheekbone under my eye. It gets a lot of attention from certain people who sometimes ask how I got it, But instead of telling them the truth, I always make something up, like I got it after a bad fall when I used to skate. Now, I'm not that super of a private person, and I kind of like telling this story when the mood takes me. It's just kind of a long story and one that sort of bums me out to tell because, well, you can listen for yourself. Now, many moons ago, a former friend of mine named Chris and myself decided to go to the state fair. It was kind of a long way away, and Chris was my ride. But then after we hooked up with this group of 3 girls and hung out with them for a while, Chris slipped away from the group with one of the girls and they disappeared. I figured they had gone to find a little privacy somewhere, which was whatever, I guess, because I got to carry on hanging out with the other 2. But then come closing time, when all the stalls and rides started shutting down, I walked all the way back to where Chris had parked his car and found it gone. I was so mad, dude. Just out of my mind furious that he'd do something like that. Chris always had these a-hole tendencies when it came to the ladies, but this was on a whole other level. I remember walking around asking people near the cars if they were headed back to Cartersville, but no one was headed my way. And as the parking lot got emptier and emptier, I realized that I was going to have to walk if I wanted to get home. It sucks so hard walking all that way, and the whole time I'm just stewing in how angry I am that Chris drove off without me. I started hitting populated areas maybe 2.5 hours into the walk, and by then I'd calmed down a little, so I was just looking at all the houses I passed and thinking about how peaceful everything was in the middle of the night. The houses had long driveways, but not long enough that I couldn't see the front of the homes, so as I'm passing one of them, there's just enough light coming from the nearby highway that I can see this big, dark handprint on one of the downstairs windows. It was so stark against the lighter-colored curtains that it stopped me dead in my tracks, and I don't know whether or not it was the texture or the way it was smeared, but a voice in my head started asking, "Dude, is that blood?" So instead of just walking off, I hopped the fence, walked up the driveway, and shined my phone light onto the window. The hand-shaped smear was blood red. Something had happened in that house, and if I later found out about it from the news or whatever, I was going to feel like one hell of an asshole knowing that I did nothing about it. I rang the doorbell a few times. Then when I didn't get any answer, and I didn't hear or see any movements or lights coming from inside, I decided to try and head around back to check there. I guess that probably sounds crazy to some people, who wouldn't dream of injecting themselves into a potentially dangerous situation like that, but I've never been the kind of person to just leave things be, and I guess that is what it is. Anyway, I hopped the second fence and then made my way into the backyard to see if I could look through a window or something. Most of the curtains were drawn, all the lights were off, and the back door was locked tight. There were no more bloody handprints, no cries for help from inside, just this dead silence out there. So with all my options pretty much exhausted, I decided to call 911 and see if I could call in a welfare check or whatever. Now I took my phone out, and just as the screen lit up, I heard the sound of a key moving in the back door of the house. I kept my phone ready to call 911, just in case the person unlocking the door was hurt pretty severely. But when the door opened, out stepped a man wearing a mask and holding a gun, who told me to drop my phone and get on the ground. I thought about trying to run, but trying to escape the way that I came in involved closing the distance between us, and if he was serious about using that gun of his, I'd make for a pretty easy shot if I tried to run. I had little choice but to do as he told me, so I threw my phone out in front of me and laid down on my stomach as another masked man appeared in the doorway behind him. Whatever they'd planned, a robbery or whatever it was, it obviously wasn't going as planned, and I could tell from the way they were whispering to each other that they were freaking out. The handprint was probably from when they'd killed the homeowner, and my heart sank when I realized that I was going to be next. When one of the men started walking toward me, I won't lie, I begged him not to kill me. I didn't say it straight up, "I beg you," but I tried reasoning with him all the way up until he kicked me in the head and told me to shut up. I stayed quiet when he told me to look at him, and I figured my time was up right there. But instead of shooting me in the face, He wanted a straight shot at smashing the grip of his pistol into my face and jaw, I'm guessing in the hopes it'd knock me out. And I knew well enough to play possum after the first hit, which is the one that gave me my scar, but he decided to give me another lick before he was satisfied that I was out. I heard him pick up my phone and toss it, and I waited until I felt like it was safe for me to move again, which was only a few minutes later after I heard a car speed off in the street out front. I had to keep on my walk, like I should have done to begin with, and wait for a passing car so I could flag it down and get help. Luckily, the first one that came my way ended up stopping. The two folks in the front seat were kind enough to drive me to the emergency room, and they let me use their cell phone to call the cops on the way. An officer met me at the hospital while I was still getting stitches, and I gave him a pretty basic account of what happened before getting a cab home from the hospital. I thought that it was the last that I'd hear of it, as surely the cops would be much more interested in whatever had happened at that house. They were, I guess, but I still got a call from them, and a pretty serious one too. They said that I needed to come down to the sheriff's office to talk to a detective there. They weren't pushy about it, but it was clear that I didn't have a choice in the matter, so I went over to talk to this lady from the state police. Now, I've been hoping whatever had happened had been non-fatal, but I know that that was just wishful thinking, and when the detective said the homeowner had been murdered, I honestly wasn't surprised. But the detective then said that I needed to be cleared as a suspect because they still didn't have a full picture of what had happened that night, and that was something that I hadn't considered. I was only too happy to cooperate as I obviously had nothing to hide, but while getting fingerprinted and having my cheek swabbed for DNA, I'd be lying if I said that I wasn't nervous as I thought about wrongful convictions and all that kind of stuff. The good news came days later. My story checked out and I wouldn't be hearing from them again unless it was to act as a witness in court. But as much as I hoped that that call might come one day, it never did. And to this day I still don't fully know what happened to that poor guy and why those masked men broke in and killed him. My name's Susie, and I'm from London, and I used to work in a restaurant that finished quite late on weekends. Whenever I finished a shift, I'd take the exact same route home, which involved walking through a massive construction site that had a sort of pedestrian walkway running through the middle of it. It was lined with these tall gray barriers interspersed with adverts for the building firm. Ironic given that they couldn't build it in a straight line, and their efforts resulted in an awkward zigzagging pattern where you sometimes got jump scared by random dog walkers as you reached a zig or turned onto a zag. And this was clean and shiny when it first went up, but over time, it started to smell a bit like piss, and no surface stays clean in London for long. It's like the graffiti artists can smell them. But as grim as it was, I sort of got used to walking down that horrible little passageway, and the jump scares weren't as bad once you knew that they were coming. But this isn't about anyone jumping out at me or chasing me down the narrow walkway. It's about something that appeared on the wall one day. As I mentioned, the passageway's gray metal walls ended up extensively graffitied, and throughout the many times I walked down it, I became quite familiar with a lot of the art on display. There were some quite nice pieces of art and then some not so nice ones too, and I could recognize which ones were old and which ones were brand new. So that night when I was walking down the passageway, I noticed a newer piece of graffiti that must have been daubed there after I'd walked down it the previous night. It wasn't like the others. There wasn't a picture, name, or slogan. It looked more like a note, a letter even, and someone had written, "Read me," at the top of it. I wasn't intending on reading it, I just wanted to get home and get in the bath, but when I saw who the note was addressed to, I couldn't help myself because it was addressed to Wine Bar Girl Who Walks Here Most Nights. I can't remember what the rest of it said exactly as I only skimmed it before walking off at double speed, but as much as it pains me to do so, I can sum it up quite succinctly with the following. It said that I was pretty, and that someone was watching me, and that this person would like to bash my pretty face in with a brick when they were finished violating me. I recall just being like, oh my God, as I walked off twice as fast as before, and somehow I got home safely without any sort of confrontation with whoever wrote that note. But I also ended up crying my eyes out in the bathtub, wondering how people can be such freaking creeps. I started getting taxis home from then on, at least until I changed jobs and didn't have to commute home at night anymore. But even so, I've never forgotten that stomach-churning terror I felt when I realized that note was addressed to me. Hey friends, thanks for listening. Click that notification bell to be alerted of all future narrations. I release new videos every Monday and Thursday at 9 p.m. EST, and there are super fun live streams every Sunday and Wednesday night. If you got a story, be sure to submit them over at my email, letsreadsubmissions@gmail.com, and you might even hear your story featured on the next video. And if you want to support me even more, grab early access to all future narrations and bonus content over on my Patreon, or click the big join button to hear about the extra perks for members of the channel. And check out the Let's Read podcast, where you can hear all of these stories in big compilations located anywhere you listen to podcasts. I also have a true crime channel called Saturn Soul, all links in the description below. Thanks so much, friends. And remember...